Hello, Dale here of Hi-Fi and Photography. I'm going to give you a brief review of my newly acquired used vintage Monster M2.2 speaker cables. Give you a little background. A few months back, I had the idea that I may want to recreate my first stereo system when I was a kid. It was a Pioneer receiver and speakers and, turntable. And my goal at the time when I was thinking this was I have my main system like you see behind me, my chair in the sweet spot, then my chair can roll around to the back wall where I have a record shelf, and I could put the vintage system there and I can just turn around and listen to that and they would share the same sweet spot. Well, I kind of got off that kick because really there's no sense of it. But I was going to try to find some neat looking cables to go with that system. I've always been kind of impressed when I go to a place or a home. They've got these big fire hose looking speaker cables with boxes on them, and they just look neat, even though they may not be a great performer. So I ran into these Monster M2.2 speaker cables, and these things are thick. They've got the little transducer at one end, at the amplifier end, I believe, and they recreate the body here. I don't think there's anything in this covering. And this has the spade connectors, which screw off. For this series, you can buy different connectors and screw them on. They're 24 plated, either spades, banana plugs, whatever. And this is an 8-foot pair. I made an offer of $200 and some dollars. Original owner, well cared for, and we settled on a price for $375, which you probably think for Monster cable that's expensive. Yes, it is, but these things look really neat. So I thought for my vintage system, I could have something like that would kind of capture your eye just to have. I wasn't really worried about sound. Any cable will sound good, but and of course some better than others, but this would have been more than adequate. So when these were new, I believe these were about $900, maybe $1,000. I could be wrong. Monster made the M series for audio stores, specific stores. Then they had the Z series that went to like big box retailers, places like that, like Best Buy, Circuit City. And then they had also an M1 series, which was a 12 gauge wire version. This is 10. Doesn't have the transducer at the amplifier end, and it's a little bit thinner. And then they had the Z series, which was at, like I said before, at Circuit City, Best Buy, what have you. And I believe it's the same 10 gauge wire that was in here, but it has no transducer, a little bit thinner outer jacket and insulation, and various different ends on them. Or you could buy it by the roll, off the spool. That's what I did many years ago. I had a home theater in a condo we were living at, and the speakers weren't that far away. So I went over to, it was actually a car audio store that also had some, home audio stuff. And I got some Z series 10 gauge speaker cables. It's about 4 feet a piece. And used them in that system on my Polk audio speaker system, just for the fronts. And, they sounded fine. But, with that system, you really couldn't tell a difference in sound quality. It was just a very kind of lo-fi home theater. I just wanted 5.1 sound. So I'm guessing it's the same wire in here. So when I got these, I thought I want to try them out on my main system and just see how they compare to my, this is what I've been running for the last 4 or 5 years. These are Zoo Mission. These are version 1. I believe there's a version 2 now. I don't know if you can see that if the camera's focusing. Mission speaker cables. And these have been great. I love them. And they sound fine. They're very neutral. They're not warm. They're not bright. They're just neutral. Whatever's going in comes out. And this pair is excellent. I mean, I can't complain at all. But I just wanted to compare it. So I let these run a few days in the background, and then I did some serious listening here after the holiday. And I have to say, these are a major step up. I've tried different speaker cables although not really high-end speaker cables. Differences, and the differences, if anything, were very little. Maybe a little more beefy low end, or something like that. These cables really make my system open up more. And I'm not saying they're brighter. They're definitely not warmer, but they are very neutral. But I feel like where say this is the low end, the bass, this is the treble. The Mission speakers, the Zoos, were right in here, and the Monsters took them to this level. So maybe wider dynamic range in photography terms. So the bass seems a little bit more deep, and the highs seem a little more extended, but more smooth, kind of rolled off, which is what I like. I don't like real crispy, tingy highs. And not that the Zoos had that. These were great. But I feel like the Zoos floated more in the mid-range more, and these Monster cables take it out a little further. So, I've decided just to keep these in the system. Back in the day when these came out, I believe 1998, 1999, they were about, like I said, $900,000. And I believe part of the design properties came from when Bruce Brisson, who was the founder of MIT Audio, which makes super high-end cables, worked for Monster before he started his own cable. And some of his designs, Monster maintained, many years later, and used them in their various cables. And I believe this is one of those. But I am really impressed with these. Plus, they look great. I mean, I know it really doesn't matter, but it does look nice having these big, wide speaker hoses, so to speak, laying on the floor next to your speaker. The one thing I would say a negative are these transducer coverings here. For the speaker side, at least in my case, it's not an issue. I can hook it to the speaker, and this pretty much lays on the floor. But on the amplifier side, it's hanging down, so you really have to make sure your speakers are screwed in tight, the terminals. So because this has a little weight to it. I did A/B test them. I put the Zoos on one side and I put these on the other speaker, and I played some mono recordings. And I know that's not a great way to compare cables, but there was an obvious difference. And for the better with the Monsters. Now, Monster, believe it or not, had an even higher line of cables than this, and they were called the Sigma Retro Gold speaker cables. And they were fairly expensive back then, still are to me, but I think they were $1,700 back when they were released in the early 2000s. And you can find some here and there on eBay, but a lot of them come in 12-foot lengths or 15-foot lengths, and they're bi-wired capable. Same with these. There's lots of 15-footers out there, and that's just way too much. And lots of bi-wire cables. Bi-wire is where you have the two inputs going on the speaker. One, I think, divides up the mids and the highs or the lows, and then just the two normal hookups going into the amp. So you got 4 coming out on one end, 2 going in the other. But I'm really happy with these. So if I run into a pair of Sigmas that are reasonably priced, because they're super expensive right now if you find any, I may try those out too. I'm just really happy with these. Monster has a bad reputation amongst audiophiles, almost kind of like Bose. But Monster, back in its day, it was founded by Noel Lee, and he got started building his own cables. And this is back when most everybody used lamp cord or just general, speaker cables, like by the spool from Radio Shack or something. In fact, back in the 70s, I believe when I got my first system, late 70s, my dad purchased for me, they gave you free speaker cables. They just spooled it off, and cut how long you need. So, that's kind of the way it was. Now, I'm sure there were cable manufacturers back in the 70s, but I don't think like there are now. You have a ton of speaker cable manufacturers, plus you can build your own and everything. Back in the day, if you went to an audio show like Macintosh, they would have their systems set up, and they would just use lamp cord or just cheap old run-of-the-mill speaker cables. So it wasn't that big of a market back then as it is now. But the cables, Monster cables, back in the day before they sold off or they went mass marketing and, you know, producing a lot of, you know, portable stuff, portable cables for phones and things like that, the cables were always well built, in my opinion. I've had a few here and there, but they were probably overpriced for what you got back in the day. Now these, I don't know, $900 back in 2000, year 2000. I'm not certain if that was overpriced for a high-end cable back then or not. Probably the Monster name probably scared off a lot of people because this is 2000s when the home theater boom started taking off, and Monster really dove into that. I mean, they got into power converters and HDMI cables and optical cables, the whole thing. So they had cables from the low end all the way to the top end. And, you know, places like Best Buy and Circuit City really pushed those cables at the time. So, you know, Monster was basically a big marketing machine, and I don't know if the cables now are any quality or of any significance, you know, for what you're paying for. And basically you're just carrying on the Monster name. But, and I believe Monster actually a few years ago, the founder Noel Lee, who still owns the company, I believe he was trying to get into crypto and stuff. So with the Monster name, so it's kind of got goofy. But I have to say, if you run into a pair of these cables, it's worth $200 or $300 in my opinion. And you can even get the bi-wire ones, which are plentiful, more plentiful than the single ones. You can also adapt those and still use them on a regular non-bi-wired system. So, and it comes with a box here, as you can see. It's a pretty good sized box. This one came with some extra. I'm not sure why the owner had extra, but came with these extra spade, 24 karat spade terminals, and these are all the same one. I know they got, you know, different angles, straight, angled, and they got banana plugs. Then they got these pins and flex tips. So they have a pretty much any type of termination you need. You can still find these fairly reasonable on eBay. Brand new, actually. There's quite a few out there. And, you know, the box, they came with these ties. So I mean, it was a nice, you know, plastic box. So, you know, Monsters, they probably were a little bit overpriced if they were, you know, including boxes and things like that. But let me just give you a recommendation. If you run into these and they're in halfway decent shape, and these are in excellent shape, I mean, pick them up, especially if they're, you know, if they're reasonably priced. I think you're going to be impressed. You know, I've never really tried MIT cables or these are super high-end $10,000 cables. I've never tried them. You know, I've heard them probably in audio stores, but, you know, you really can't really tell anything there unless you're comparing, and I wasn't. I would pick these up. They look good, and they sound great. Place in the comments your thoughts on Monster cables. Have you had a pair of these or the pair of the Sigmas? I'm kind of looking for a pair of those if I can find a pair and compare them. Also, don't forget to subscribe and like and tell all your audio and photography friends about the channel. So we're going to start producing some more videos. You'll start seeing a wider range of videos now that I have the time to start producing these. So tell me your thoughts on these Monster cables. And I tell you my thoughts on this pair. They're excellent. So until next time, have a great week.